Welcome everyone. We're glad to see you tonight. Tonight, Dr. Nick Posegay will present on material and linguistic history of Arabic manuscripts in Muslim and Jewish contexts. I'm going to turn it over to our chair for the evening. Professor Geoffrey is a professor of Hebrew and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Cambridge, and he is going to chair our session for tonight. So Dr. Khan.
Right, well, thank you very much. And I feel very privileged to be asked to chair this session in your group. It's also a great privilege to introduce my former student, Nick Posegay, who's just to give you something about his background. I mean, he circulated something of his biography, but I'll just say that, well, I got to know Nick when he came to Cambridge to do a PhD with me. But he'd previously done his early studies in Chicago in his first degree in his MA, and then he did a PhD with me on the various different theories of phonetics in the medieval Middle East, which turned out to be absolutely brilliant thesis. It was impressive in many ways, and one of them was the fact that it was dealing with the three major linguistic traditions of Arabic, Hebrew, and Syriac, which very few scholars can handle nowadays. People are so specialized, but through this combination of this sort of wide sort of linguistic range of Nick, and great insight in many other ways, he produced this absolutely wonderful thesis, which was published shortly afterwards. Then rapidly got a prize from the British Association of Jewish Studies, and then Mick won a postdoctoral fellowship and as a Leverhulme early career fellowship, and he has been developing his work on linguistic traditions, but also expanding and extending in many other diverse ways, including work on various sorts of other sorts of medieval manuscripts, such as Qurans, and also the materiality of manuscripts. And I think this showing his great vitality he has, and full of interesting discoveries and great insights. So I think that you'll hear a lot of this show his range. Tonight's talk, I'm sure, will show his range and his insights in many of these fields. So I think I'll just pass the floor over to you, Nick, now.
Right. Well, thank you, Geoffrey and Anastasia, for that very kind introduction. And I also want to thank Dr. Gomalauri for inviting me to present today on Arabic manuscripts in interfaith contexts. And what I really want to do today is look at one overarching question from a few different perspectives. And that question is, what can we learn from Arabic manuscripts in interfaith contexts that we could not learn if those same manuscripts were in a different context? So in order to do that, we're going to look at Arabic manuscripts like this one, and this one, and this one. And we also need to understand the original context in which certain medieval Arabic manuscripts were produced and consumed. So that means asking questions like who used a manuscript, where did they use it, and especially how did they use it? What did people do when they were finished using manuscripts, and how did manuscripts move between peoples of different faiths? So what we would really like to know is if, say, a Christian produced an Arabic manuscript and sent it to a Muslim, or a Jew produced a manuscript that a Christian later purchased, or if a Muslim produced a manuscript that Jews recycled for something new. So I will give you an example. This is an Arabic petition sent to the Ayyubid Sultan Salah ad-Din, also known as Saladin, sometime in the late 12th century. And it was composed by a Jewish man named Abd al-Baqi, who lived in the Egyptian town of Milig, which is in the southern Nile Delta. And Abd al-Baqi sought an official ruling from Saladin to get out of his unpleasant job as a tax collector. I guess it didn't make him very popular. So this petition passed through the Ayyubid chancellery. Someone read it to Saladin, and Saladin ruled that Abd al-Baqi had to keep collecting taxes for him. So this response was recorded on the back of this leaf that we see here to notify other government officials. And we want to ask now, what does this tell us about interfaith contact? Well, it is evidence that Jews in 12th century Egypt had access to the Ayyubid court system, and they had some right to petition the Muslim government. It also shows us that Saladin reviewed these petitions and issued rulings that passed back through the chancellery. But of course, there's something else about this manuscript, and you'll notice that the margins are full of Hebrew script writing, not Arabic. So when the Muslim government finished with this petition, they discarded the paper. They didn't keep it in an archive. And the Cairene Jewish community then purchased it or otherwise acquired it as scrap paper. And Jewish writers then used it for writing in Hebrew characters. The Hebrew script on this document is the reason that it survived for 800 years. It was kept in a Genizah, specifically a very famous Genizah known as the Cairo Genizah. And a Genizah is a hidden space, often in a synagogue or a cemetery, where Jewish communities, deposit manuscripts that are too old or damaged for continued use. And the intent is to prevent those manuscripts from being profaned like typical rubbish. Especially if those manuscripts have Hebrew text or the name of God written on them. They have to be put into a Genizah. So the Cairo Genizah, as a term, is a corpus of more than 300,000 manuscript fragments that were mainly stored in a hidden chamber on the upper floor of the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Cairo. And Egyptian Jews deposited manuscripts into this chamber and other Genizahs around the city for centuries, from about 1100 all the way up to 1897. And when scholars refer to the Cairo Genizah, that generally indicates the corpus of manuscripts from all these Genizahs. Today, almost all Cairo Genizah manuscripts are held in American and European libraries. There are almost none left in Egypt. So thinking back to that Saladin petition, it's not what you would expect to find an Arabic document in a Genizah designed to protect old Hebrew books. And yet there are hundreds of Arabic administrative documents that Egyptian Jews recycled for Hebrew script writing and ultimately deposited in the Cairo Genizah. So they survive precisely because they cross between Muslim and Jewish spaces, and that is what we're interested in today. Because during the peak period of Genizah manuscripts, between the 11th and 14th centuries, practically all Egyptian Jews spoke Arabic as their first language. So this was the same as their Muslim and Christian neighbors, and it's what they would have used at home and out about in their daily lives. So many of them could even read classical Arabic and write in Arabic script, and sometimes they even stored Arabic script manuscripts in their Genizah. We know of at least 7,000 Arabic manuscripts in the Cairo Genizah collections at the Cambridge University Library, and there are even more at other libraries. But what may be surprising about these Genizah manuscripts, these Arabic Genizah manuscripts, are that, to put it plainly, they are entirely Islamic. And the slide is loading. The thing that stands out the most is Quran manuscripts. So all of these manuscripts here are Quran fragments that were found in the Cairo Genizah. And if they were found somewhere else, then we would have no reason whatsoever to think that Jews ever possessed them. There's no Hebrew text on any of them, and there is nothing to indicate that they differ from Quran manuscripts found in more Islamic contexts. So this is a good time to look at the manuscript for my title slide, which is another one of these Quran manuscripts and is one of my favorite manuscripts in the Cambridge collection. It's copied in a very distinctive angular Arabic hand, probably not much later than the 10th century. And if you look at the scale, you see that it is literally 3 inches tall. So this was a miniature codex that could easily have been carried in a pocket. And if you look very closely, you will also see the remnant of a fingerprint here, possibly from the original scribe or possibly from whoever smeared all that red ink on the lower left side. So the question, of course, is how did any of these Quran manuscripts end up in a synagogue? And if we think about the logistics of Genizah storage, it is difficult to conclude much except that these Quran manuscripts were, at some point, in Jewish hands. So in order for a manuscript to get into the Ben Ezra Synagogue Genizah chamber, someone would have had to enter the synagogue, climb up the stairs to the second floor, cross the women's gallery, and push the manuscript through a hole in the back wall. This may or may not have required a ladder, depending on when it happened. Only a member of the Jewish community could reasonably have done this. So then the new question is, why did Egyptian Jews have Quran manuscripts and other Islamic texts in the first place? And that answer depends on each manuscript individually. The main theory is that some Egyptian Jews had personal libraries which contained a mix of Hebrew and Arabic script material, including Islamic manuscripts that they read for polemical reasons. So that is, they read the Quran so they could better argue against Islam in favor of Judaism. And some past scholars have proposed that when these owners of these libraries died, their entire collections would have been placed into a Genizah, regardless of whether they were Hebrew or Arabic script. And this does appear likely for some Qurans and other Islamic material. For example, there are about a dozen folios of this Arabic codex in the Genizah. I apologize for the poor image quality. These are cropped from screenshots. And the manuscript is a copy of a text known as Kitab Asbab an-Nuzul, the Circumstances of Revelation. And it's by the 11th century Muslim scholar Ali ibn Ahmad al-Wahidi. And this text is part of a subgenre of Islamic exegesis focused on the circumstances in which Muhammad received revelations from God. There's no Hebrew script anywhere on it, and yet here it is, which leads some to conclude that Jewish scholars were reading it for polemical purposes. However, the physical features of other Islamic manuscripts in the Genizah imply different uses before they were deposited. So here, this is a bifolium that is the beginning of another small personal use Quran manuscript. It includes the first and part of the second surah. And we'll zoom in, because if you look closely at the top, you can see some of the original sewing stations where the paper was sewn into a quire. But then at the bottom, there are these 6 other pairs of holes where the page was sewn again. And there's also this unexpected fold in between those sewing stations. So you would expect the center fold of the bifolium where it doubles over itself, but you would not expect this fold that cuts across both folios. So these signs indicate that this bifolium was recycled. Someone sewed it into the spine and cover of another codex to reinforce its binding. We don't know who used it for that purpose, although it was probably a Muslim bookbinder. And whatever new book they made could have been completely unrelated to the Quran. And if a Jew obtained that book, then they could have used it, read it, without ever knowing what text was hidden inside the binding. Then, once it was too old or damaged to keep reading, they deposit the whole volume into the Genizah. There are lots of other Genizah manuscripts that show evidence of reuse for bookbinding. Some of the things that we can look for are these rows of sewing stations, additional places where we would not expect it to be sewn. But also symmetrical cuts and folds like this, things that would not appear from normal use in a codex. Another possible sign of reuse is accretion or residue that is left over from an adhesive glue that might have been used to stick a recycled folio onto a new pasteboard. An example of this type of accretion is this Arabic manuscript, which is very difficult to read. Zooming in, we see it is copied in an early Abbasid script style that is most typical of modern Quran codices produced between the 8th and 10th centuries. But this is not another Quran. It's the text of a dua, an Islamic prayer of supplication. And this is already interesting, as there aren't many examples of non-Quranic texts copied in this sort of highly trained professional early script style. In fact, I don't know this for sure, but I think this manuscript is the oldest extant copy of this particular prayer. Later traditions attribute it to the Caliph Ali in the middle of the 7th century, but the earliest attested version that I found is in the work of a 13th century text. So it's by a Shi'i jurist named Said ibn Tawus. This manuscript predates him by at least a couple centuries. If we flip the page over, we see that this manuscript has actually been reused in another way. And this side is a palimpsest, which means someone erased the original text to reuse the parchment for other writing. In this case, the Arabic text was erased to write a series of notes in Hebrew, which is probably why this manuscript ended up in the Genizah at all. And the new writer likely reused this folio as another cost-saving method, just like how earlier we saw the Jewish writer who reused the Saladin petition to write Hebrew script. And besides just recycling things, it seems that some of Cairo's Jews also own certain prestige items in Arabic script. Basically very nice looking manuscripts that were produced by professional scribes and were likely expensive to purchase. So some of these were stored in the Genizah, even though they also lack Hebrew script. They're mainly, I would say, non-denominational items, so not explicitly Muslim or Jewish or Christian, but useful for some other reason. I'll give examples from two genres here. One is folk literature. There's a lot of folk literature in the Genizah. The most famous example is probably Khalil wa Dimna. So this manuscript was clearly produced by a professional Arabic scribe and a talented artist. And in fact, it's the calligraphy is quite similar to another Quran fragment in the Genizah, which is probably produced around the same time. The second genre is then medical texts. So the Genizah contains a lot of Arabic script medical texts, many of which are also quite elegant and definitely made by professional scribes. And this makes sense. Medieval medical knowledge was widely available in Arabic and useful to people of all faiths, and doctors would have had the cash to purchase expensive books. Some of these texts even rival the nice Quran manuscripts in terms of calligraphy. And if you think that this is one of them, you are right, because it was written by the same scribe who copied that miniature Quran with the fingerprint on it. Now, just as the previous examples of Jews recycling Muslim texts look very pragmatic, owning these kinds of prestigious manuscripts is pretty neutral. If you're a Jew in medieval Cairo, fancy Arabic books might be good to have, but they're not overtly Islamic. So even though these things end up in the Genizah, they don't really tell us much about how Cairo's Jews thought about Islam, either positively or negatively. On the other hand, the idea that Jews mainly read Islamic texts for polemical arguments is pretty negative, and I don't doubt that that did happen. But is it possible that medieval Egyptian Jews also had some more positive interactions with Islam and the Quran? And I would argue yes, specifically in the realm of popular magic. See, for thousands of years before the Cairo Genizah, the people of Egypt produced textual amulets for their perceived magical properties. So for example, this papyrus amulet is in Demotic, which is a descendant of ancient Egyptian and a precursor to the Coptic language. And it is estimated to date between about 1000 and 700 BCE. Like this one, many amulets have a long vertical format that could be rolled up to store in a cylindrical amulet case, like these ones. And these cases could then be strung and worn around the neck as a necklace. Muslims began producing amulets in the same vertical format using the text of the Quran in the first few centuries of Islam. So this is another papyrus amulet with verses from Surah 59. And it does not come from the Cairo Genizah, but it is from Cairo, and it's datable to the 9th or 10th century. If you look at the bottom, there is a dotted line followed by a jagged tear. And I suspect that this amulet was once part of a longer papyrus roll containing multiple amulets, which were torn off and sold one at a time. Medieval Egyptian Jews did exactly the same thing with Hebrew amulets. So here is another Genizah manuscript, and it is made up of multiple Hebrew amulets designed to protect the bearer against scorpions. You can see that a few amulets have been torn off, again, presumably for individual sale. Sort of strangely, actually, these scorpion amulets invoke the name of the Greek goddess Aphrodite, which you can see here. So that's pretty interesting. The thing is, though, there are also Islamic amulets in the Cairo Genizah. And these three are all amulets produced using woodblock printing technology, probably between the 10th and 12th centuries. The one on the right quotes the Quran, and the other two list the names of God in Arabic. But I can hear you saying, but Nick, these aren't manuscripts. This is the Interfaith Manuscripts session. These are all printed. And you're right, we don't have time to talk about block printing today. So instead, I will strongly recommend that you check out Christina Richardson's book, Roma in the Medieval Islamic World, which gives a history of this topic. The important thing for us right now is that these block printed amulets wound up in the Cairo Genizah. And this suggests that some Jews used ostensibly Islamic amulets while participating in that long tradition of Egyptian amulets that stretch back for 3,000 years. This Genizah manuscript seems to suggest the same thing. It's a leaf from another Quran codex that was carefully removed from its binding. You can see that the sewing stations on the left side have not been torn through. Instead, there's a very straight cut on the left-hand side. And there are also these regular creases all along its length. And you can see them here. And these creases indicate that the leaf was once rolled up. So if you notice the scale at the bottom, it's also only a few inches tall and would have been the perfect size to fit in one of those amulet cases. So there's even a unique Genizah manuscript, which may indicate that Egyptian Jews produced magical texts using quotations from the Quran. So this leaf contains the text of the first and second surahs of the Quran, beginning with the phrase Fatihat al-Kitab up on the top right. But it's all transliterated in Hebrew characters. To be completely clear, this is still Arabic. It's just written in Hebrew letters. The person who wrote it was Jewish and must have had access to the Quran in some form. But this isn't a whole Quran manuscript either. It continues with omens for undertaking a journey, meant to help a traveler reach their destination safely. Now, exactly why Quranic text should appear in that context, I don't know. But I can tell you that this exists, and it's in the Cairo Genizah. The takeaway here is that Jews in medieval Cairo could access Arabic texts if they wanted, even Muslim religious texts and other Arabic manuscripts produced by professional scribes. They read and engaged with those texts in various ways, and not all of those ways were necessarily negative or polemical. Eventually, for reasons that we don't completely understand, Jews deposited thousands of these manuscripts into Genizahs alongside Hebrew script material. And all of this is only apparent because these manuscripts circulated in Arabicized, multi-faith contexts that ultimately led to their preservation in a Genizah. So returning to our main question, what else can we learn from Arabic manuscripts that is only apparent because those manuscripts existed in interfaith contexts? We're going to change gears a little bit, and because I want to show you what the Hebrew alphabet can tell us about the way Arabic was spoken 1,000 years ago. If you aren't familiar with the Hebrew alphabet, that's okay, just stick with me, and I promise it'll be worth it. So as we have seen, medieval Egyptian Jews had a lot of manuscripts in Arabic script, but most of the time they wrote Arabic like this manuscript using Hebrew characters. This type of writing is known as Judeo-Arabic, and on the most basic level, Judeo-Arabic is simply a transliteration of Arabic using a different alphabet, usually with Hebrew square script. So just as I can transliterate, just as an example, the Arabic word for book, kitab, using Latin characters, kitab, medieval Jews wrote it with Hebrew letters, kitab, it's the same. So Judeo-Arabic manuscripts are much more abundant in the Cairo Genizah than Arabic script ones, but they're still all Arabic. So looking again at this Judeo-Arabic Quran, we have the text of Al-Fatiha, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, etc. And each Hebrew letter here represents one Arabic letter. Easy. If you already know Arabic, you can learn to read this in an afternoon. So when we study the history of the Arabic language, when we study the history of the Arabic language, we often find that it's difficult to reconstruct the vernacular pronunciation of medieval Arabic dialects, and this is for several reasons. One is that the phonology, or the sounds of spoken Arabic, differ from that of classical Arabic, the thing that was more commonly written. The second is, of course, that vernacular Arabic was rarely written down. And third, writers who did transcribe spoken Arabic in a document or something did so with the classical Arabic writing system, which does not have the tools needed to represent all sounds in spoken Arabic. And what do I mean that the classical Arabic writing system can't represent all the sounds in spoken Arabic? There are a couple issues, and one is that the classical Arabic vowel system only has signs to mark 3 different vowel sounds, and that's a, e, and u. A, e, u. But in many Arabic dialects, there are more than 3 vowels. You can have things like o and a, but if you're writing an Arabic script, there's not an easy way to mark those sounds. For example, let's take an Arabic word, hamil, which means a bearer or one who bears something. In a very prescriptive classical sense, this should be pronounced hamil with a long medial a sound. But in some spoken varieties of Arabic, the long a changes to a, and you get a pronunciation that's more like hamil. Regardless of pronunciation, though, there's only one way to write this using the 3 Arabic vowel signs, and it looks like hamil, the first version. But biblical Hebrew has 7 vowel signs, not just 3, including one that represents this a vowel sign. So what if we write this word in Hebrew characters? Well, then we get hamil marked with the proper sign for the vowel a at the bottom, which is this. And this example comes from another Genizah manuscript, this one entirely in Hebrew script. It's a glossary of the biblical book of Samuel, providing Arabic translations for difficult words in the Hebrew Bible. And it's dated to approximately 11th century. If we look at the top here, we see our example of hamil, or rather hamil. By comparing the different ways to mark hamil, we see that the Judeo-Arabic writing system provides new phonetic information that the classical Arabic system does not indicate. So that is to say, the Jewish scribe who copied this manuscript recognized that the spoken Arabic in their community differed from formal Arabic, and they used the tools available in their Hebrew writing system to record that difference. There are other examples like this from the same manuscript. The Arabic word mikhla, bag, appears marked as mikhle, and the word qana, meaning spear, is marked qaneh. There's a lot of these with the long a vowel. Now, one of the issues of using Hebrew at all to transliterate Arabic is that Hebrew only has 22 letters, and this is not enough to replace the 28 letters in Arabic on a one-to-one basis. So Judeo-Arabic scribes came up with some tricks to solve this issue. They employed a diacritic dot, known as a dagesh, which comes from the biblical Hebrew writing system. And this dot can help us detect other features of a medieval Arabic dialect. In Hebrew, a letter with a dagesh dot represents a plosive pronunciation of a consonant. So that's b, d, k, p, t. But without the dagesh dot, that same letter indicates a fricative consonant. So v, k, f, f. You can see the dots on the right-hand side and not on the left. So Judeo-Arabic scribes used this principle to link individual Hebrew letters to pairs of Arabic letters. And we can see this from a couple examples in our manuscript. At the top here, we have the word khatan, and the initial letter does not have a dot in it. So it is pronounced as a fricative ch. But underneath it, the word ma'arakat, battlefields in the center, same letter, kaf, but it has a dot in it, so it is a plosive. So it's a ma'arakat k. Below that, we have the word phani, which means his second. It has a pronominal ending. And the initial tav has no dot, so it is the fricative tha, phani. Whereas below it, the word qihatek, the tav here has a dot in it, so we know to read it as a plosive t. This practice of using the Hebrew dagesh dot to mark Arabic letters is useful for us when looking at one Arabic letter in particular, and that is jim. Because in classical Arabic, jim is usually pronounced like an affricate j. But in many modern and historical Egyptian dialects, this letter is instead pronounced as g, the plosive g. So the j sound of classical Arabic does not exist in biblical Hebrew. So when Judeo-Arabic scribes represent it, they use the Hebrew letter gimel. And in biblical Hebrew, gimel usually represents the sounds g and r, depending on whether or not it has a dot. So to make sure the reader knows to read the classical Arabic j, a Judeo-Arabic scribe will put a dot either above or below the letter, you can see here. But our manuscript doesn't follow this rule. Instead, the scribe only follows the Hebrew phonetic system and writes gimel with the dagesh dot whenever we expect to see an Arabic jim in classical Arabic. So this indicates the plosive consonant g, which is exactly what we would expect to see if the scribe is recording the phonology of their own Egyptian Arabic dialect. Now, after all, this manuscript does come from Cairo. So for example, here we have 3 words marked with the Egyptian gim sound. Al-Againib, and you can see the gimel in the middle. It has a dot, which means it's a plosive g, and 2 dots below marking a long a vowel, Al-Againib. Then Higara, which has the dot again in the gimel, and in contrast to the classical Arabic Hijara, this is instead with g. And finally, we have the word guthat, which is in construct form, so it means the corpse of someone. And we have the same dagesh dot for g, and also the dagesh here marking a plosive tav, and not here, fricative tha. So we have g, thet. So the same letter twice, but 2 different pronunciations. None of these dialectal features would be apparent if the manuscript were copied in Arabic script. So what we have seen is only possible because the Jewish scribe who copied this lived in a highly Arabicized society. They spoke an Arabic dialect every day, and they perceived the phonology of that dialect as important enough to record it with complete vowel signs in a religious context. This would have been used probably while reading the Bible. And there are actually a lot of Judeo-Arabic manuscripts that can provide this kind of precise phonological data, but at the moment, not many Arabic historical linguists consult Judeo-Arabic sources. Moving on, I want to highlight one other area where Judeo-Arabic manuscripts created in interfaith context can benefit scholars of Arabic and Islamic history. And that way is connected to the 9th century Abbasid translation movement, which of course saw the translation of Greek and Syriac texts into Arabic for wider consumption in the Islamic world. Because when Abbasid translators converted Greek texts into Arabic, they didn't just become accessible to Muslims. Arabic-speaking Jews could also read them. In some cases, they even transcribed those translated texts into Hebrew characters. And we can see that on the left side of this manuscript, which is a Judeo-Arabic text. It's Arabic, just in Hebrew characters. Meanwhile, on the right, which is the verso, there is an Arabic script colophon, which tells us exactly what this text is. It's Kitab fihi hudur al-mantaq min qawl Aristoteles al-Filosof. So a book containing the definitions of logic according to Aristotle the philosopher. This book was originally translated by the Syriac Christian bishop Abdi Shu'aib ibn Bahriz, and the colophon also indicates that it belonged to a man named Sadaqa ibn Ishaq. Presumably, this Sadaqa was a Jew who preferred to read this book in Arabic script read this Arabic book in Hebrew script rather than Arabic script. Now, when Arabic texts like this were transliterated into Hebrew characters, it increased the chances that they would be deposited in the Cairo Genizah and survive to reach us today. So that fact is especially relevant for another manuscript, which you can see here. One of my colleagues, Dr. Nadia Vidro, discovered this just a few years ago in the Cambridge Genizah collection. It's part of a book about classical Arabic grammar, but unusually, it does not use the traditional grammatical categories known from mainstream Arabic grammarians like Sibawayh. Dr. Vidro observed that it is actually based on Greek grammatical categories. And she identified this as a lost work by Hunayn ibn Ishaq. So Hunayn was another Syriac Christian and is likely the most famous scholar of the translation movement. And he's best known for translating scientific texts, but medieval sources tell us that he also composed an Arabic grammar called Kitab Ahkam al-I'rab ala Madhhab al-Yunaniyin, so the rules of inflection according to the school of the Greeks. That work was thought to be lost to history, but it is right here. There are no known Arabic copies, but this copy in Judeo-Arabic survived in the Cairo Genizah. So this is not the first lost text to be found in the Genizah, and it probably will not be the last. So a lot of these Arabic manuscripts in the Cairo Genizah, especially the non-Jewish texts, have been neglected for a long time. The issue, of course, is that manuscripts produced in interfaith contexts often require specialists in different fields to evaluate them. But Cairo Genizah studies, which was once a field bound almost exclusively to Jewish history, has been shifting to give more attention to Arabic material. And I want to highlight two ongoing projects that are doing this. One is the Princeton Genizah project, led by Marina Rusto, which has been tackling Arabic documentary material for a while now. And the other one is an ERC project called Arabic Poetry in the Cairo Genizah, led by Mohammed Ahmed at Trinity College Dublin, which is uncovering lost Arabic poetry from Genizah fragments and Judeo-Arabic sources. I would also recommend, if you're interested, Mark Cohen's article, Genizah for Islamicists, which has an excellent bibliography up through 2006. In short, though, there is still a need for Arabic specialists to work on Genizah material, as well as a need for Genizah specialists to engage with Arabic sources. So as we come to an end here, if nothing else, I want you to remember three things. The first is that the Cairo Genizah, a Jewish institution, preserved thousands of Arabic manuscripts from every conceivable genre. Second, medieval Egyptian Jews engaged with Islamic manuscripts for a variety of reasons, and we don't understand all of those reasons yet. Third, Judeo-Arabic manuscripts contain significant data for the linguistic and literary history of the Arabic language. Much of this data is untapped by Arabic scholars. All of this is a result of the multi-faith and multilingual environment of medieval Cairo. And I would like to thank you for listening. For reference, all the articles that I cited where I was an author are available in open access. You can download them from their publishers' websites, or my academia page, or my Humanities Commons page. And finally, oh, right, if you want access to the other works, anything that I didn't write, please email me or message me on Twitter, and I will help you out. Finally, then, while I have your attention, as Geoffrey mentioned earlier, I did write a book. It's called Points of Contact, which is about the shared intellectual history of vocalization in Syriac, Arabic, and Hebrew. And it's a bit less about manuscripts than my talk today, but if you're interested, you can download it for free from Open Book Publishers. And it did win the 2022 Badges Prize for the best new monograph in Jewish studies, so I guess it's all right. And with that, I will turn it back to Geoffrey, and I do look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, for that excellent talk, full of minute philological detail in points, but also looking at more general questions, which I think are incredibly important. The Cairo Genizah has been neglected by Islamicists to this day, as you're saying, that there's still is kind of off the radar, I think, of a lot of people in sort of mainstream Islamic studies. And I think this raises, I mean, perhaps the sort of questions most relevant to this group would be of what's somewhat of a more general nature. I mean, this raises the question of how we sort of compartmentalize our disciplines. I mean, sort of Hebrew is somehow generally associated with religious studies and sort of rather than cultural studies, if I may put it that way. And I think which perhaps, you know, we can take this further in terms of, you know, how, you know, in terms of where does Judaism belong in the academic world, in the humanities or religious studies or whatever. But I mean, I think perhaps the sort of general question now, just as a lead question to sort of stimulate a bit of discussion, I would start with this issue about, I mean, you show very nicely how we have this somewhat unexpected, for some people at least, of the Arabic manuscripts in the Cairo Genizah. Perhaps I should just say, just passing quickly, that of course, as you know very well, Nick, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, that of course, if you look at the Karaite Jews and the Firkovich collections of manuscripts, you find it even greater, the sort of number of Arabic manuscripts, to the extent that they even wrote transcriptions of the Hebrew Bible in Arabic. And I think you're pressing on this point about the sort of the negative, the previous negative attitude that some scholars have thought, you know, associated with Arabic script, like that's used for polemical purposes, you know, things like that. But I think, you know, certainly when you start going into the quantity of material and clearly looking at the Firkovich collections, you know, in the Karaite world, you see that there was a very positive dimension to use of Arabic scripts, and I think you were showing this yourself. So I think the question is, you know, we are dealing here, I think, with cultural convergence, aren't we? I mean, would you agree with that? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when we're talking about faith or interfaith, I mean, is this perhaps the right way? I know we're in the Interfaith Forum, but is this the right term? I mean, are we
I think,
with culture?
Right. Convergence is cultural convergence and interfaith engagement. It's all sort of around the same idea. And what I want to stress is that the academic infrastructure that we have to study this type of interfaith or cultural convergence doesn't really exist. We have Jewish studies and we have Hebrew studies and we have Arabic studies, and a lot of people say that these are separate. Why would we ever go to the same meeting? And like you said at the beginning, people are so specialized, they tend to not look at sources from multiple traditions. So I would just encourage collaboration as one solution to that between scholars of Arabic, scholars of Hebrew, you know.
Nearly reaching the hour, and I think perhaps we should wrap up here. And I'd just like to thank Nick again very much. We can't, unfortunately, in Zoom, we can't give you at least an audible sort of clapping of hands. But
well, thank you.